Knee cave, which can also be knee valgus, has long been thought to be dangerous and an inefficient way to move when you're squatting. A lot of misinformed professionals demonize and fearmonger this movement and then try to sell you on them fixing it. These fixes have often been shown to be ineffective in the literature, but I'll get to that later. And also, they are usually just decreasing the weight well below working weight, so you can kind of move however you want because the weight isn't challenging enough to force you to move in a certain way. So in this video, I'm actually going to break down how knee valgus is not dangerous and how it actually could be a beneficial strategy to use. If you're a Squat U or Athlean X fan, then you can go ahead and leave your comments down below right now without actually watching the video or reading a single piece of literature on the topic like you usually do. The engagement is always appreciated. So starting off, allowing knee cave in the squats could potentially be a beneficial strategy to use. And contrary to popular belief, it may actually increase how much work the glutes do. So this is actually because when your knees cave in, you're actually increasing the moment arm on the glutes, which increases the relative load felt by them, and they have to do more work. And I know this sounds contradictory because the standing belief at the moment is that knee cave is caused by weak glutes, but this is kind of saying the opposite. So if the moment arm is increasing on these muscles, that means your body is trying to load them more because it feels strong and confident using them, and that's how it's going to lift the weight. When you're getting to heavier weights, especially near your max, your body is going to just naturally try to find its strongest positions, get the weight up however it is going to get it up. It's not dumb. Your brain knows how and where it can produce force. So taking the old belief, if you had weak glutes and your body knocked yourself into this knee cave position, you would just immediately fail the squat right there because now your weak muscle group actually has to do more work and you're just going to fail. So this is why it's important to not just blindly accept these old beliefs, but take these critical thoughts and challenge them to see if they actually stand up against it. And if they don't, then it's time to throw that belief out. So if knee cave is actually loading the glutes more, this could potentially be why the interventions on trying to change knee cave are actually ineffective. Usually these interventions are targeted at strengthening the glutes. And like I said earlier, knee cave is actually increasing the work your glutes have to do, so you're probably getting into that position if your glutes are strong. And with these interventions that are strengthening the glutes without relatively strengthening the other muscles as much, are actually going to make knee valgus a more favorable position because your body's going to feel even stronger and even more confident with this knee valgus. And this is also a good example of how certain beliefs can persist and guide the evidence down a route that may be incorrect. If the status quo is never challenged or critically thought about, then it just becomes dogma and people blindly follow it. I feel like that thought actually goes beyond health and fitness, but so getting back on track, this knee valgus increasing the load on the glutes may be a contributing factor as to why so many weightlifters use it and they can squat insane weights with a very upright torso. The knee cave allows the glutes to take some of the load off of the quads or at least increase the glute contribution without having to increase torso lean. And this is very important in a front squat or a heavy clean because leaning forward will make it a lot harder to keep the bar on your shoulders and could end up with you missing the lift. So being able to maximize how many muscle groups are working without increasing that torso lean is a very beneficial strategy for this. And similarly for the back squat, this allows you to load your glutes more without having to increase torso lean, so then you're not loading your spinal erectors as much. And if your spinal erectors aren't your strong point, then increasing that torso lean is going to make the squat a lot harder. And these two examples kind of stem from the belief that the quads actually max out first on squats, and this is kind of shown with some EMG data. It's not the best, but it is there. So taking that belief, the quads are going to max out on the squat first, and then it needs to increase the contribution from the glutes somehow. Let's work through a hypothetical example here. You're maxing out on the quads with your squat, so then you're going to increase that glute contribution by increasing torso lean. When you do that, your squat could potentially turn into a bit of a good morning, and it can be a bit of a balancing act to get that up, and it could end up with you missing the weight if you go too far into that position. However, if you use a knee valgus strategy, you can keep a more upright torso, not have to use your spinal erectors as much, and get that contribution from the glutes. Now, you could go too far in either strategy, and that's just the reality of pushing max weights. Your body's going to do whatever it can to get the weight up. It's probably going to look ugly, and if it's actually above your max, then you're going to miss the weight, and something just has to give out. That's the reality of pushing max weights, and it's okay. It's better to accept the fact that something is going to give out, and you just have to work with your body. So when it gets to those positions and it's moving however it's going to move, understand this and work with those positions and strengthen those positions so that you can push through the rep when you have to. If you try to just force it in positions where you're not as strong, you're just artificially limiting your gains and how much weight you can lift. The more you work with your body, the more resilient you're going to become and the stronger you're going to be in the long run. And I've also made some Instagram posts on this, and without fail, there are always some comments saying that knee valgus is dangerous. So are these comments right? Well, the short answer is no, but I'm going to explain that. So this belief comes from looking at injuries in sport as well as some expert opinion from the biomechanic purists. I'm going to start with the knee pain, or if you're reading the papers on it or want to just sound fancy, the scientific term that is used is patellofemoral pain. Basically just means that there's some pain around your knee joint or your kneecap. So there are actually a lack of studies showing that people who have knee valgus develop knee pain. But if there's no causal link, then how is this belief getting spread? Well, that comes from the misinterpretation of some correlational data from these people who like to demonize knee pain and wrongly attribute a causal link just because there's correlation. Now, what's the difference? Well, if you were paying attention in high school, you probably would have heard that correlation doesn't imply causation. That is very important here. And I'm going to explain this through an example of wrongly applying that causal link by using correlation. So the example is that, the more firefighters that get sent to a fire, the more damage is done. So firefighters cause damage. So that's drawing that conclusion and that causal link from the correlation that the more firefighters that are a fire, there's usually more damage seen. But it's missing the actual important variable and the actual underlying cause that the bigger the fire is, that causes more firefighters to show up, and that bigger fire actually causes more damage. So kind of tying this back in, just because sometimes there's knee valgus seen with knee pain, it doesn't mean that the knee valgus is the cause of the knee pain. And it could actually be the opposite way around. A good example of this kind of reverse causality elsewhere in the body is with the shoulder. So when there is a nerve block or shoulder pain, the shoulder actually changes how it moves, instead of the shoulder moving differently, causing the pain or causing the muscle to stop working. Again, this statement goes against the popular belief, but it has been shown that this is the opposite way around. And I know there's probably some people that are losing their minds on this at the moment, but hey, yet again, this is another thing that the health and fitness industry got wrong and is preying on to sell solutions to you. So it's very important to not think that one thing causes another just because there is a correlation. You have to actually prove that causal link. Now, if we think back to earlier in the video where I was talking about knee valgus and how that loads the glutes, the knee cave allows the glutes to take some of the load off of the quads, or at least increase the glute contribution without having to increase torso lean. We can actually start to reason that knee valgus may be a beneficial and adaptive strategy to load the quad less. But why would your body want to do this when it's having knee pain? Well, the quads cross the knee joints, so contraction of them increases loading on their tendon as well as forces going through that knee joint. So if you have that patellofemoral pain, using your quads could be an aggravating factor and something that your body would not want to do. It's going to find different strategies to use them less so that the knee is loaded less and there's less pain experienced. And knee valgus could potentially be a great way to do that. So you're loading your glutes more and your quads less for the same task, and that could potentially decrease the total forces going through the knee and stop that aggravating factor. So blaming knee valgus for knee pain could potentially be a classic example of blaming or labeling the sign as the problem and diagnosis. And this mistake is often done by people who don't like to critically think about movement, or they think that the body is only selectively adaptable and there's perfect ways to move, which when you think about it makes no sense. No movements are bad, you just have to find the right entry point. So all in all, the evidence and the biomechanical reasoning is pointing towards knee valgus not being a causal factor for knee pain, but rather it could potentially be unrelated at all or a beneficial or adaptive strategy when you're experiencing knee pain. Okay, so what about the ligaments? Well, again, the evidence on this has kind of shown a correlation between knee valgus happening around the time of an ACL injury. So there are some papers that looked at video analysis of a lot of knee injuries and showed that there is knee valgus happening around the time that the injury is happening. Now, there are a few things wrong that drawing the conclusion that all knee valgus is bad just by using this video analysis. First, just because the knee valgus was present around the time of the injury, it doesn't mean that that person actually uses a knee valgus strategy when they're squatting, when they're running, when they're landing all the time. They may have been completely clean on screening tests, and it's just that sports are chaotic and sometimes force you into positions and you have to use a lot of different movement strategies so that when the injury occurred, it just happened to be that that movement strategy was unavoidable. I always like to challenge this point by bringing up the hypothesis that maybe people who present with knee valgus and actually train more regularly, especially resistance train more regularly with knee valgus, could potentially be more resilient to these injuries. But we can't know that because the fear-mongering around knee valgus is deterring this type of training as well as deterring research looking at this. Second, to repeat what I said before, correlation doesn't mean causation. So just because there's knee valgus around the time of the injury doesn't mean that the knee valgus caused it or that it's inherently dangerous. And just like before with the pain, who knows, maybe this knee valgus is actually a result of the ACL injury. And this ties nicely into the third point that there is some evidence showing exactly that. The maximal knee valgus may actually be occurring after the ACL injury has occurred. And this is somewhat in line with what I was talking about before, with how knee valgus could potentially be a beneficial strategy to load the quads and therefore the knee joint less and the glutes more. So quickly on what the ACL does, it stops the shin bone or tibia from sliding forward on your thigh bone or femur. And that action, that forward translation of the tibia, is also produced by your quads contracting because they insert on the top of your shin bone and pull it forward, causing your leg to kick. So when the ACL gives out and is no longer to resist this exact force from your quads, your body could potentially be quickly reacting to that and moving to a less quad dominant strategy so that it is not just exacerbating the problem. Or that movement could just be a result of how the knee joint changes when the ACL is ruptured. So there's different joint orientations and it just happens to move that way. Again, we don't really know, and there's not that much literature looking into it very much. But all in all, this is just adding to the hypothesis that knee valgus isn't inherently dangerous, and it may actually be an adaptive and beneficial strategy to use. It's just a strategy that could potentially just use more glutes and less quads without having to increase that torso lean. And finally, there are some papers that actually try to explore if there was a causal link between knee valgus and ligament injury. So they screened people, put them into two groups, those with knee valgus on these screening tests, those without knee valgus on these screening tests, followed them for multiple seasons and tried to see who got more injuries. And guess what? The knee valgus group did not get any more injuries than the people without knee valgus. So the conclusion on these is that knee valgus is not a predictive factor for ACL injury, and these screening tests aren't effective for actually predicting ACL injury either. And keep in mind that this isn't even really looking at resistance training. It's looking at sports. So in resistance training, when you're doing your squats, the forces through your ACL are even lower and it's even less of a risk and less of a concern. So to think that knee valgus is inherently dangerous when you're squatting is kind of ridiculous, and it's time to start just believing that the human body is adaptable and understanding that different movement strategies can be beneficial for different people. So all in all, knee valgus is not dangerous, and it may be a beneficial and more powerful way for some people to squat. And does this mean that I think that knee valgus is never inefficient and that everyone should try using a knee valgus strategy? Absolutely not. Everyone has their own individual differences, and some people may be stronger with a knee valgus strategy and some people may be weaker with a knee valgus strategy. It's important to work with your body and understand how you're strong. Now, if you've never squatted with knee valgus, but you do want to try it out, don't just throw it in and start doing your working weights and working sets with it. This would be absolutely idiotic and take all load management and throw it out the window. Your body isn't going to be prepared to be thrown in at that level, so start off light and progress it slowly. One strategy that I like to use when I'm throwing in a new movement is to change my mindset around it so that I'm not chasing the numbers, but I'm just trying to explore the movement and feel comfortable with it. This could be done by playing around with the weight and doing some extra light back off sets with it, or just doing a totally different day and looking at it as active recovery or mobility work. And the adaptation to this could take many months, and that's okay. There is no rush. And finally, I just want to throw in one more little thing. I get a lot of comments of people asking me for personal advice with their injuries or their programming, and I cannot help you with those personal questions. It is against the regulations of my profession to give out personal health advice to people who are not my patients, and it's also how I make a living, so you're kind of just asking me to do my job for free. This would be like asking a plumber to just show up to your house and fix your toilet and not pay them because, you just asked them kindly. I hope this makes sense and you understand that. These videos are educational, and I hope that me putting out this free content is very helpful. However, if you want more personal guidance, you would have to become either a patient or client of mine. Anyway, with that out of the way, I hope that this got you to think a little bit differently about knee valgus as well as just movement in general. Thank you for watching. Now go out there and make some gains.